Hi stamping friends, Melissa Kerman here with Melissa's Crafting Treehouse. I am an independent Stampin' Up! Demonstrator and I sell all the products I share in my videos, and you can find me at my website of course and also on Facebook and Pinterest. Just search for Melissa's Crafting Treehouse and you should find me. Today I'll be sharing two projects that I made for the Color Fusers blog hop for June 2019. These are the colors that were part of the challenge. And I'm also going to be using the Free as a Bird bundle, which includes the Free as a Bird stamp set and stitched nested labels dies. I'm going to start with doing my die cutting. And so I'm going to do two different versions, one in white and one in blueberry bushel, since I am making two cards. So I'm starting with my white piece, and I'm going to place my die cut in the center, so it's centered top to bottom and left to right. I'm using my magnetic platform, so that helps to make sure that the die stays in place as I run it through the Big Shot. And then I'm going to go ahead and do my blueberry bushel piece as well. So as I mentioned earlier, I'm using the Free as a Bird bundle, which includes that Free as a Bird set you see there, and the Stitched Nested Labels dies. And you can see you get a whole lot of dies with this, and I'm using the die that I'm showing you right there. So it's the largest of the smaller two sets, if that makes any sense. Now I die cut one extra piece as I was playing and practicing with my Whisper White cardstock, and I decided it would be useful to use it as a bit of a guide for where to stamp my images on my vellum. So for this card I am going to be heat embossing on my vellum, so I'm starting by rubbing the whole surface with my embossing buddy, which is an anti-static, and will make sure that the specks of embossing powder don't show up where they don't belong. And then as you can see, I'm laying out my guide to determine like where I want to stamp my images. So I'm going to be using Versamark, which is a clear sticky ink, and I am going to be using the guide really only for the bird and for the sentiment piece, because they are kind of squished in there tightly, and there's not a lot of latitude for getting them in the wrong place. So I've inked up my bird with the Versamark. So there I just stamped the bird justified to the left, and now I'm going to take my sentiment and justify it in the lower right hand corner, being careful to try to not overlap those images. That's a little tricky to do because of course Versamark is a clear ink, but you know, you just do the best you can, right? So now I'm going to go ahead and heat emboss these elements now before I do the next step. That way it'll be just a little bit easier to place the other images, knowing exactly where these first two most important images are. So now I'm bringing my guide in again to eyeball where my other images are going to be, and I'm using two of the flowers from the Free as a Bird stamp set, and I'm going to do a couple of large ones in three different spots, and then some small ones. And of course I'm bringing in the guide to eyeball, of course, where I'm placing each of those flowers, and doing that each time I stamp. And then I'm putting my black embossing powder on there, and I'm going to go ahead and heat those. So after I finish my heat embossing, I'm just going to put that image under the light off there to the left, and I'm just making sure that all of them are all completely embossed and shiny. Now you can see I'm turning my vellum over so that I'm actually going to be coloring on the back side, and I'm starting with my Real Red Stampin' Write marker, and I'm just coloring the whole bird in. Now I'm leaving a little bit of space right near the beak because I actually looked at images on Google to see how a cardinal actually really looked, and there was a little bit of black or darkness around the beak, so I left a little space there. So I'm going to add some of the gray granite in there. So I'm coloring in my flowers again, doing the back side, and every once in a while I'll turn the vellum over to look at the front side and see how it looks on the front side. Now, coloring on the back side is just the way I was taught how to color on vellum. I think what it does is it allows the image to look a little bit more uniform on the front side. Another important thing to know about coloring on vellum is that your ink will stay wet on the surface for quite a bit longer than if you're coloring on a Whisper White cardstock. So you have to be super careful not to smudge the ink, not to touch it with your fingers, or have your, don't lay your hand down while you're coloring. Otherwise you'll get it on your hand and then you'll rub it on something else as well. So that's another benefit, of course, to having the coloring on the back side too. Now you see I'm touching the image right there, which is a little bit risky because then I might be getting that red ink on my finger and then I might be getting it somewhere else on my cardstock. So just word to the wise, just be super careful when you're coloring on the vellum not to touch that color. Now I'm testing to see if I've colored enough of the images, the ones that will be hidden behind the frame. So I keep going back and forth and adding in more detail as I look at the front of my vellum. Now I'm adding a little bit of shading to the extent that I can with a regular Stampin' Write marker. I added a little bit of the red again towards the outside edges and some gray granite on the legs and the ground. So now I'm going to add even some more shading on the red bird, as you can see I'm doing right there. So while I'm coloring, you might notice that on the left hand side there's a little smear of red, and that was because I had my hand down on the image while I was coloring, and then I smeared it on the edge of the vellum. Now here's a quick little tip. You can actually on a paper towel or on your finger, apply a little bit of water and then just sort of rub off that excess ink on the edge. So that actually worked to clean off the side of the vellum right there where it was red. Alright, so I'm finally done with all of my coloring and my little touch-ups, and I'm ready to go ahead and assemble my card. So here are all my pieces laid out. So I've got a Whisper White card base. This is the white frame that I cut out at the beginning with my die cuts, and I'm adding some adhesive to the outside edge of that. So now I'm just going to take that frame and place it right over the top of my vellum, framing my bird and my sentiment exactly where I want them to be, and just pressing it down. Now at this point I'm super sensitive to the fact that there might be some wet ink on the back side, so I'm going to pull in a paper towel to put my piece down on so I don't get any excess ink on anything while I look at it. And I'm going to experiment with using my aqua painter to actually create some lights and darks on the back side of the flowers. Now I don't know how well this actually worked, but I did remove a little bit of the color from the flowers, and that's what you see me doing right here. So when you use Stampin' Write markers, you do get a really solid color, coloring it in. So it's hard to get nuance or lights and darks, which is why I'm choosing to do that. So I'm removing some of the color, taking a paper towel and kind of dabbing up the excess moisture on there. And I do think it did give me a little bit of more variation in the coloring of those flowers. So now I'm going to take a piece of Whisper White cardstock, place it onto my Blueberry Bushel card base, because I do want it to be white in behind the vellum so it stays nice and light and bright. Now I'm going to put dimensionals on the back side of my frame all over the back, and I'm very generous with how many I put on there because I want to make sure it stays up, and just on high speed attached and removed the backings of all of those dimensionals. I'm just attaching it to my Blueberry Bushel piece and attaching that whole piece to the card base. And I am all done with this card. So for my second card, I'm not going to show you all the details, but I did want to tell you a little bit about what I did and show you how I assembled it. So for this version, I used the Cherry Cobbler Blends Alcohol markers and the Gray Granite markers, also the light and dark of both of them. And I used those, of course, to do my coloring of my bird and the ground. And I have all the pieces already with adhesive on them to go ahead and assemble this. And I'm using some gray granite on my Whisper White card base. I've already put dimensionals on the back side of my Blueberry Bushel frame and removed the backings. I had it on that plasticized sheet there just to make it super easy. So that frame is raised up. And then I have adhesive on the back side of my colored Whisper White piece, and I'm just going to stick that right down into the frame so that it's recessed down in and attached to the gray granite piece. So super easy to put this together. I hope you've enjoyed my projects today, and we'll go to my website and check out the rest of the projects for the June blog hop. Plus, make sure to check out the video description below for lots of useful links, and if you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up, share it with friends, and subscribe to my YouTube channel. Thanks for spending some time with me today, and happy crafting!